All right, give me 1 second to share screen. Oh, great, can everyone see this? Perfect. So hi everyone, welcome to the January 30th, 2025 meeting of the Gilman Square City Redevelopment Parcels Civic Advisory Committee. My name is Ben Demers. I'm a senior planner in economic development under the Office of Strategic Planning and Community Development. And I also serve as staff liaison to the Civic Advisory Committee. Just a quick tech note for this evening. So we are hosting this evening's meeting on Zoom webinar. Just a note about Zoom. So there will be a recording that is made available afterwards, but also the chat function within Zoom has been disabled. This is for all city meetings to comply with what is called open meeting law. So this is guidance from the state around how we host open meetings. And it doesn't allow for what is called side conversation, which chat is like the digital equivalent of. So just usually like to make a note of that at the beginning. Just to run through our agenda quickly. So we'll start with a roll call and approval of the previous meeting summary that I sent to CSE members ahead of the meeting. We'll then always have time for public comment at the beginning of the meeting. We'll then do an update regarding the Somerville Redevelopment Authority's discussion of urban renewal in Gilman Square, following a letter that the CSE had sent to the SRA in the fall, as well as the status of development of city-owned land. We'll then do neighborhood updates from CIC members, and we'll always leave time at the end for a second public comment period. Although if there are any members of the public who are joining us this evening, which I do see a couple, if anybody wants to make a comment during the main items, we generally are able to make time for that. And then we will adjourn. Anything people want to add to the agenda before we dive in? Great. Okay, so quickly to do roll call. Diana?
I'm here.
Thank you. Melinda?
Here.
Thank you. Ron? Don't see yet. Jack?
Yes, I'm here.
Perfect. Thanks, Jack. Jamie?
Here.
Jennifer mentioned she is not able to make it anymore this evening. Michelle?
Present.
Ben? Elgart?
Present.
Thank you. Councilor Jesse Klingen?
Present.
And then I don't believe I have seen Councilor Ewan-Campen join. Let me just check my participants tab quickly. Yeah, I do not see Councilor Ewan-Campen on. And I'll also just note that Rachel Nadkarni, Director of Economic Development, is also joining this evening. And then the other just quick administrative items. So for the meeting summary that I sent out, we generally welcome any feedback or edits that CAC members might have before I post it along with the meeting recording. So the meeting recording is already up, but we generally like to also post this meeting summary with it. Did anyone have any comments? And then I'm just going to shift us into our first public comment period. So given that we have a couple members of the public, I just want to leave a moment if either of those members of the public want to make any comment at the beginning. Again, can also wait until after we have discussed the substantive items this evening. And I'll just give about 20 seconds, but if you would like to make any comment, please just use the raise your hand function. Okay, I am not seeing any hands going up yet. Just make a note. Give me 1 second. There we go. We should be seeing the presentation in full presentation mode now. So the first and main kind of discussion item for this evening is around the Somerville Redevelopment Authority, or the SRA's discussion of urban renewal in Gilman Square. So this is a follow-up to the letter that CAC members obviously sent to the SRA in December. So again, I try to start these items with a little bit of recap for anybody else who's tuning in. So as members of this group are aware, one of the goals of the Civic Advisory Committee was to determine whether urban renewal is an appropriate tool to encourage joint redevelopment of city-owned land in Gilman Square at 350 Medford Street, or what's commonly called the Homan site, as well as a city-owned kind of green parcel at the intersection of Medford and Pearl Streets. So joint development of those publicly owned parcels with private owned land of the mobile station at 360 Medford Street. And so this is the intersection of Medford and School Streets. And so this is really the heart of Gilman Square. And so around this question, last fall, CAC members had drafted a letter to send to the SRA that summarized engagement efforts around redevelopment of city-owned land in Gilman Square up to that time, as well as thoughts around using urban renewal to take the mobile station. So the letter asked the SRA to explore the use of urban renewal more closely, and it also it noted this alternative option that we have talked about a bit, which actually I think had originated from a recommendation from an SRA member early last year, which is that to achieve joint redevelopment of these sites, there's also the possibility that the city could do an RFP for development of the Homan's lot, and in that RFP could provide incentives for joint development with adjacent parcels. So just some of the options that were being discussed, but really was encouraging kind of more clarity around whether urban renewal was the right tool to use here. So staff presented that letter to SRA members at their November meeting. SRA members discussed the item. They expressed a lot of appreciation for the amount of engagement that CAC members had done, just in terms of learning what people wanted to see on the site. And then they also noted, as staff have discussed, urban renewal could provide more of a sense of clarity or certainty for joint development, assuming that an urban renewal plan is approved by the city council and the state. They did also express some concerns, though, with the use of urban renewal in this space. Sorry, is this clicking through? Great. That's an interesting effect that PowerPoint is doing. So they expressed some concerns with the use of urban renewal. So the main ones that they talked about were whether or not this would be a valid use of urban renewal, given that the mobile station is an operating business. This is something that we have discussed a little bit with the CAC previously, that generally when urban renewal is used, it is it's in an area where businesses are not really operating at all. There are instances, though, and we've talked about it in this case, where we think that we could make a strong case of it, because of the fact that the parcel is not necessarily being used for its full economic potential, and there's a strong desire for joint redevelopment, coordinated redevelopment. But they had some concerns around whether it would qualify. They also expressed some concerns around potential environmental contamination at the site, and whether the SRA wanted to do a taking of a parcel that is currently being used as a gas station, because that use is associated with potential environmental contamination. And that might lead to any significant costs for cleanup for future development. And then what I think was kind of hovering over a lot of this conversation and was expressed by the chair of the Redevelopment Authority is kind of just hesitance in general about the creation of a new urban renewal plan at this moment. I'm not sure how closely in general CAC members have followed 90 Washington Street. This was another eminent domain taking that the Redevelopment Authority had done in 2019. This is kind of in the inner belt, right on the border with East Somerville. This is a parcel that was taken initially for $8.78 million. And then the owner of the land sued, as commonly happens with eminent domain takings. They sued around the value that was used in the taking, and a jury ultimately awarded an additional approximately $26.5 million. So saying that the land is worth around $35 million. And then with that payment plus interest, the SRA will ultimately end up paying around $39 million for what they thought cost initially around $8.8 million. So given that, there's a lot of hesitancy within the SRA at the moment about starting a new urban renewal plan. So in general, SRA members, I think they didn't feel that the sense of certainty that urban renewal could provide in this instance outweighed the potential concerns around using urban renewal in this site. So at this time, they've directed staff not to move forward with exploring urban renewal at this site. They didn't take it off the table completely. They don't really have a mechanism for saying like we would never use urban renewal in this place, but there would need to be a stronger reason for the use of urban renewal as a tool. I know this is not necessarily the hoped for response based on our recent discussion last year, and that this took a little bit longer to get an answer than we had hoped, but this does provide some sense of clarity that the CAC was seeking in terms of whether urban renewal is a viable tool here. So I think this is still helpful guidance, but curious to also hear from other CAC members, just kind of responses to this.
I saw that article in the news today, and I thought, if it's really unfortunate that somebody can do this, that a property owner can do this after I don't know how the mechanics of it works, but it's really does put a chill on thinking about using redevelopment if this kind of thing is going to come back. And from what I read in some earlier article, the landowner was looking at the value of lab construction projects nearby, which are not very likely to happen there potentially, and also is totally overbuilt now. But the jury, maybe the jury just didn't want to go along with the city's idea. So I do agree that that's it's a disappointing outcome, but it does seem to give clarity to not pursuing eminent domain for the mobile site. But I think that we could still look at incentives to encourage future development to fold that site into a larger development.
Yeah, definitely. And that was something that SRA members definitely mentioned, like that is still a good route forward for trying to achieve joint development of these sites. And yeah, we could have a whole side conversation about 90 Washington Street and the initial taking, and sort of ultimately is the jury decides the value. And so it ended up being significantly, I think, over 4 times more is what they'll be paying compared to what was initially paid. Councilor Klingon, I saw that you unmuted, but
Yeah. Oh, sorry, am I in order? No.
if that's all right. Ben?
Okay, I'll go first. Thank you, Jesse, for seating. Yeah, it does sound like they're not fully evaluating this on its own merits, but rather the current state of things for the city. And maybe the thing that I'm not so clear on is we do know that the mobile station owners have explored selling the property. So it's not so much that, and we were told that the only way the city would really buy the property is through eminent domain. So it's in a weird way, I'm not quite sure how they expect the city to be a steward for the property if the city otherwise won't buy it in other ways.
So the alternative that we've talked about in a couple of past meetings is, rather than the city acquiring the parcel directly, is that we can provide incentives in an RFP for city-owned land that incentivize any developer who is receiving that RFP to purchase the adjacent parcel. So whether that is like a density bonus for saying if you're able to purchase an adjacent parcel, you're able to build higher, which allows them to then go to the table with an adjacent landowner just with different values essentially in mind. We can also provide more time than is usually provided in an RFP process. So many RFP processes are like 1 to 2 months. And if you provide more time for allowing that discussion between an RFP respondent and the adjacent landowner, then it might allow for someone to actually come to a deal and bring that in their response to the RFP.
Okay, and then in regards to the environmental contamination, sorry, I have questions around the board.
No, it's
But
okay.
the environmental contamination, are they just saying that, I mean, we're in Somerville, lots of land has been used for industrial purposes. And we also know we are the densest city in New England. So clearly those aren't incompatible. Why, I guess I'm not sure if they're saying that other land uses are more appropriate than residential in this current housing crisis. What, if you could clarify the guidance that they're offering, or just that they couldn't, I don't know, couldn't make sense of it. I'm not quite clear.
Yeah,
where
and
that was.
this is really, this was just one of the items that they talked about. I think I would say the main concerns out of these are the first and third bullet, which are they weren't sure if it would be a valid taking. And so like it is that additional sense of uncertainty with going down this route. And I know there are already kind of several points of uncertainty, and this was kind of an additional one laid onto that. And then also not having a particular appetite at the moment for an urban renewal taking or a new urban renewal plan. The environmental contamination piece, this came up from one member, and so I just wanted to include it, that it had come up in the conversation. It was a concern that, and again, we haven't really pursued investigating this further, but a concern that the costs of doing the cleanup for that parcel, given that it is a gas station, kind of could potentially outweigh the benefit of developing it jointly with the adjacent parcel. I think that you could get into a real back and forth of, well, there are still like, how do you quantify the benefit of having these parcels developed together? And that's something that this group has talked a lot about. So that's definitely not the final word on it. They just, I think in general, expressed concern moving forward with the site that they felt could likely have environmental contamination.
Can I add a little bit to that too?
Please.
I think a part of it was also the sequencing, right? That like if ultimately we're talking, the goal is that it's a joint redevelopment by a private party, that the direct path from current ownership to that next private party, bypassing city and SRA, de-risks it a little bit for the city and the SRA, because then we're not in that chain of custody should there be contamination down the line.
Thank you. Both answers helped clarify.
Councilor Klingon?
Oh, thank you. Through the chair, I just want to say that, something that you said, Ben, that, ultimately the juries decide. That's not always the case. I just want to point that out, that a lot of times it doesn't go to a jury, and that, settlements are reached. And while this did go to the jury for whatever reason, and, the SRA now owes this big amount of money that we're helping them with. It's unfortunate that now we're a little cold on urban renewal, especially since, if you look at 299, I mean, there's multiple business there that are in the catchment zone, as well as, I mean, all of Union Square. So, I mean, that argument, as far as the gas station being an operating business, I mean, especially when you consider the fact that it is a gas station right next to in a neighborhood right next to a train station. I mean, I think it could be considered blight, in my opinion. But it's frustrating to hear that, and I understand. I mean, this, in terms of economic outlook, things are not great all around. So, but I think some of these reasons are a little thin, in my opinion. I mean, 297 Medford Street's looking to get redeveloped. They have a lot of contamination, and that's going to be the land trust with a nonprofit making 100% affordable housing up there. I mean, things are still happening, and it's just unfortunate that this area is now going to sort of lose out because of, other factors happening in the city. But I agree with others who have said, if we could get something going on the Homans and try to make it a combo development, that would be great. But I don't think that, I do think that an urban renewal plan would be extremely important here and is going to really make a difference in, anything happening here anytime soon. So I'm disappointed.
Thank you for sharing that, Counselor. I believe we might have a couple of members of the public that have their hands raised as well. I want to make sure CAC members have a chance to comment before I open it to the public. Okay, not seeing any other hands. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, no, I like just said that.
Got it.
Yeah, I don't have too many thoughts that haven't already been said, but I would be, yeah, I don't know if there's an easy way to see this information. I would be interested to know, like, sort of the history of any other recent urban renewal instances, given that there's, that 90 Washington seems to be very in the forefront, but I wonder if it's yeah, kind of like eclipsing, some other more successful instances in recent years.
Yeah, I mean, Councillor Klingon referenced the Winter Hill Urban Renewal Plan, which is the urban renewal plan around 209 Broadway. So that was obviously a generally, I think people see as a successful plan where there was a lot of frustration around the use of that land for 20 or so years, and so a lot of positive energy coming together around the vision of that plan, and definitely other kind of positive and active instances of urban renewal in recent history. So a lot of the development in Union Square that is based around a fairly large urban renewal plan. So yeah, I mean, again, I think as CAC members are noting, the timing of this is that the Redevelopment Authority lost their appeal and heard this news in October of 2024. And then we had this discussion around urban renewal in Gilman Square in November. So, I mean, I do want to note that SRA members didn't, again, they don't really have a mechanism for saying this is completely off the table. It was more a way of saying, we think that this is probably not the best tool here. And there's definitely not a strong interest in it in this moment. But it doesn't necessarily take it off the table forever. But I think there just need to be a strong argument made at another time in which it's being considered. Councillor Kling.
Okay, so with that, you just said, to everybody, that, yeah, maybe, once things have progressed on any Washington and we sort of put it somewhat in the rear view to some degree, and then, we come back with a strong argument, maybe, that wouldn't be too far off necessarily in the future. So, that's something to sort of grab onto, but, I mean, outside of that, have you talked to the mobile owner? Is this for sale? Do they know that what the SRA said? And now are people, I mean, I know the market is kind of, not so great right now with interest rates and all that. But has anybody talked to the mobile guy or anything?
We haven't had any more recent conversations with the owner of the mobile station since our last CAC meeting, no.
Okay, I have to jump off, but I appreciate everything, and I'll see everybody soon.
Good. Thank you, Councillor. Ben.
I assume you have more slides and you're going to talk about next steps. Is that right?
Yes, that is true.
Then
why don't I also take a quick question? So James, I'm gonna unmute you.
Yeah, actually, I think Councillor Clinton mostly spoke to what I was wondering about. Yeah, that we could theoretically avoid a long legal battle if the city sought out just trying to buy the property outright. But it doesn't seem like there's a lot of interest on the city's part.
Yeah, so generally, if the city is going to do an eminent domain taking directly, it needs to be used for a public use. And so there have been discussions about, and Rachel, please step in on this if this is out of line, but from my understanding, if the city were to do this directly, there's less flexibility in how this particular parcel could be redeveloped. So generally, if the city is doing a taking, it's for something like a park or like a public facility, rather than, in this case, what has largely been expressed as the interest of the neighborhood and the community has been for something that could involve some portion of private redevelopment on this site.
Got it. Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments about the urban renewal component specifically? Okay. Okay, so the second goal of the CAC, obviously, is to provide overall guidance to the city about just the general redevelopment of the city-owned land in this area. So we are still in the same position that we were in last time we checked in on this. We're not ready to move forward with longer-term redevelopment. So we don't have a particularly active role or questions at this moment for the CAC. Staff still believe that completing the citywide disposition strategy for city-owned land needs to be developed prior to moving forward with developing in Gilman Square. We have been, just to be frank, pretty all hands on deck with 90 Washington Street, as well as 209 Broadway and the Armory and a few other projects of this sort. And we have not had the capacity to complete the disposition strategy that we have talked about in previous meetings. And while these projects continue to have such large time components, I don't have a super clear estimate of when we're able to complete the disposition strategy. So given this, and given kind of the cadence of meetings over the last year, I wanted to check in with CAC members kind of with the interest of check in on people's interest in continuing to meet. I think it likely makes sense to stop meeting for this time. This idea was floated kind of last March or April. We talked a bit about it, but at that time we had decided to kind of push forward with the urban renewal question and get more clarity from the redevelopment authority. And there was also kind of more active questions around programming on the temporary civic space at the Gilman pop-up on the Homans lot. So wanted to check in with members about this. Obviously, this group, not necessarily answering all of the questions that people have wanted to discuss, but have been a lot of really great, has fulfilled a lot of the goals that we have talked about over the last several years, and that I know you talked about with Rachel prior to my time joining the city. There's been significant engagement that really helps staff understand what people want to see at this redevelopment in the future. It's also helped staff understand the pretty significant challenges and questions that we need to answer around things like accessibility up to the station and just how big of a priority this is, but also kind of difficult planning challenge and funding challenge it is. It's also spurred conversations from the CAC have spurred the temporary civic space, the Gilman pop-up space, which welcomed a lot of people to the site. And as I have mentioned a few times, it's given a clearer sense about whether urban renewal is the proper tool in this area at this time. So yeah, given that we do not have active questions around redevelopment of the city-owned parcels in this area, I wanted to check in with people about interest in continuing to meet, and if there's any specific ways that you would kind of want to use the time, or if the group were to stop meeting, kind of encapsulate the work that has been done. Ben.
I would be interested in hearing more about if we were to stop meeting, because it wasn't a city priority. I'd say development of this parcel is still a neighborhood priority. And therefore, I'd want to know what mechanisms would be in place for the neighborhood to hear about any updates in the city priorities, or to spur city priorities to re-engage on this, because I'd hate for us to put it down and then for there to be no way to pick this back up.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the getting kind of updates about development, so obviously you know this better than anyone on the CAC. The city does continue to meet regularly with the Gilman Square Neighborhood Council, which is one of the main conduits, I think, to the neighborhood. And I know that y'all also host weekly, or no, sorry, not weekly, monthly public meetings where you talk about those conversations with the city and give updates specifically around development in this area. So that definitely does remain an important conduit. With any redevelopment of city land that the city moves forward with, will have some form of kind of public discussion or engagement. So it definitely wouldn't be that, like, if there were to be development moving forward on this parcel, that there wouldn't be general engagement. There would definitely be wider engagement with any disposition or redevelopment of a city-owned parcel like this. So definitely the information would not be lost. Diana?
I guess I agree that there's not a lot of point in continuing to meet if the city's not ready to move forward on this, but I find it really frustrating that this is held up so much, and so many things like the school, the Winter Hill School and everything is being held up, and that this is being held up by the disposition study. I don't know if the city has consultants working on it or if it's just staff or if there's any way to accelerate that, but it seems, I mean, obviously there's so many things in the city that would benefit from being able to be worked on and provide new housing and get some, infill going. It's just frustrating that it's taking such a long time. But I would be, willing to, I think it makes sense to not keep meeting if we can't do anything on this site for now.
And I mean, yeah, I appreciate hearing the frustration as well. I understand that it's helpful to hear that clearly. And obviously we've had a lot of discussions of what the community, the neighborhood hopes this parcel can be. So definitely understand there's going to be frustration with not feeling ready to move forward on things.
Yeah, I guess given the circumstances, I'd be in agreement that, I don't know, how much sense it makes to meet in the interim. I appreciate getting, the updates on, maybe what's happening and maybe future temporary things planned and all of that, in the meantime, but, yeah.
Sorry, there's a siren going on. Ben?
I was thinking that if the Somerville Redevelopment Authority had wanted to move forward, then we would be in a good position to support contributing more directly to an RFP process. If that's not the case, I do know that there have been other initiatives to create an RFP for the home insight parcel, and thereby, the city parcels in general in the Gilman Square area. I guess we were positioning this as kind of like a staged order of like, well, we get the mobile property and then we can have an RFP. And I know that even though the city isn't pushing, or I'll say that that the folks who in the city who would be contributing most to an RFP have their time divided on other initiatives. But is there anything limiting the creation of an RFP outside of that, or contributing to that process? Because I understand while it's not the city's goal to create an RFP if they're not interested in taking, or there's no other timeliness to that process. I also know the creation of an RFP takes a lot of time. So I'm getting a jump on what exactly would go into that. I don't think the goals of the neighborhood will change. I don't think they've changed in the last 5 years. I don't think they're going to change in the next 5 years or 10 years. So I guess what I'm asking about is just the creation of an RFP outside of either the window of this Civic Advisory Committee, or and outside of the priorities of the strategic planning.
The metaphor that's been sticking for me for where we are in this is trying to untangle a necklace. And that, like, if Gilman is like our third knot back in this chain, like, we can't truly untangle it until we've gotten through those first couple of knots. And so those knots sort of like that are in that queue are the city's capital improvement plan, and the city's and its disposition strategy. Because where this lands is this question of how do we utilize city property and release city property out into the world is tied up in some of these questions of what assets are we going to be in need of in the immediate 5 years. And that has been the sticking point of how do we, in order to get to that, like, to the place where we can surplus the property and take that surplus decision, we have to get through those steps. Winter Hill School was one of the things that, like, threw a wrench in that. We've been, the folks working on the capital improvement plan have been stuck because they're trying to navigate how to incorporate the Winter Hill School needs into that layer. 90 Washington is another one. It threw another wrench. And so that layer will start to untangle, but it's going to take a little bit for us to untangle that first one and then get through this disposition strategy where we're looking at, all right, what does that mean then for the rest of the assets and what assets we can release out into the world and take that surplus decision. So that's the layers that are coming, and it's hard to say with clarity the timeline that will be at a place where this decision can be made. We're still a little stuck, and that's why it's hard to sort of like launch even though we do have a lot of clarity coming out of these last couple of years, ton of clarity coming out of these last couple of years of what folks are looking to see happen at this site, and where the neighborhood's perspective is. It really, Ben, to your point, it hasn't changed. That was one of the first things that we did with this group, is like making sure that we like really dug in on not just the form, but the uses as well. And there's a ton of clarity, I feel like, in that prompt that we can carry forward from the work of this group.
Yeah, I guess what I'm also trying to add is, while I understand that that part of the exercise of this group is to document that clarity that we've arrived at. And I almost feel like an RFP would be a great way to document that, to translate the insights into a more actionable form. And even though it wouldn't be used right away, because the city's saying this is not the right time to move forward on that, the city isn't ready for that, we have these other knots to untangle. Again, the vision of what we want won't have changed. And so I just wonder, like, right now I feel like we have a lot of raw insights that haven't really been synthesized into a format that they are most actionable. And I would hate to defer that and then go back to square one, because we know that there have been multiple, I'll say, starts to this effort of clarifying and documenting the direction for city-owned parcels in Gilman Square and non-city-owned parcels in Gilman Square.
I'll be honest, I think getting to a place of an RFP would be very hard for us to actually pull off at the moment on the staff side. Like, I do think there's a capacity limit that we are going to be under constraint with 90 Washington and carrying that between 90 Washington Street and getting 299 Broadway launched, that like to actually produce the RFP for things for you all to react to, it will, like, that queue also is stuck.
Are there any other comments, questions from CAC members?
I guess I'm just like wondering whether in the disposition study, is there a way for the city to do some kind of broad classification of potential sites and rule out certain uses for certain sites? Like you could look at Gilman Square and say, this is right near transit, so we should be building housing here. And like some other site is, you know, has other attributes, and maybe that lends itself to a school or something like that. And then at least the city could be like saying, like assigning priorities or uses to sites and then moving forward with some of them so that everything isn't being held up by until, you know, everything is figured out to it in extreme detail. I don't know anything about how you're doing the study. I just wish that there was a way to have, you know, some kind of broad categorizations that would allow some things to keep moving forward. But I understand about not having enough staff time, certainly.
Yeah, but I mean, definitely heard about the hope that any disposition strategy that's created would give some sense of how we hope to see different parcels used, even if not in like the full detail that an RFP would reflect. That's definitely something as that document is developed. We've talked about that being a component of it. It's not really in like a final, like, what will this look like, but that's definitely something that we can aim to include in that document, and then also giving a sense of what the prioritization should be for like which parcel should be disposed of or redeveloped first. That's definitely a goal of what would be encapsulated in that document. So I'm hearing generally that people think it does probably make sense to stop meeting. I'm also hearing, so I know Ben mentioned like one way to encapsulate this would be in an RFP. And as Rachel has mentioned, there's just not staff capacity to create that RFP document at this time. Are there any other thoughts about like kind of final ways to encapsulate? Are people, I mean, we could meet, you know, once more beyond this. This could also be the last meeting. Again, I want to be respectful of people's time and make it feel like it's productive and not feel like we're losing information. I think the part of what I really appreciate about the letter that was sent to the Redevelopment Authority is that it captures so much of the engagement and the planning context of what was done, and a lot of the priorities that came out of that, along with the kind of more detailed documentation of the engagement that all of you and Rachel did in 2022. Yeah, just want to make sure people are comfortable with that if we end up deciding that this is the last meeting or want to meet again or et cetera.
Yeah, it's also an opportunity, like, we could also set, like, do we want to do a, like, sharing out of these documents in a more broadcasted way to say, like, hey, just want to, like, close out, like, this was the work that we produced, like, put it together as a small package, as an email that we send out to folks, like, and then, you know, distribute more widely, host some sort of, like, gathering at the space to be like, you know, just want to celebrate and say thank you. I mean, personally, I want to say thank you to all of you for sticking it out through this and really giving us all this detailed feedback. So like, I want to take a moment to recognize that, whether that's tonight or another format. Do we want to do it, you know, a thank you? I will bring a thank you donuts to the site if we want to meet in this when it's not freezing cold, some sort of format like that too. Like, we want to make sure that we're really honoring the fact that like this was really important and strategic work that you all did put in.
So I'm sorry, are we disbanding or do we just plan to reconvene at a later date?
What's tricky is we don't have a sense of we don't have a clarity on the timeline of what when the next meeting could be. It could be many months. I'll be honest. It could be, you know, it could be a year from now. I don't really have a solid answer of when that date would be. I realize we also asked you all for a 2-year commitment to participating in this group, and we've been thrilled that we've been able to, have you all participating for 3. And that consistency of everyone's participation has been wonderful. But do want to really be respectful of everybody's time and the commitments that you all made. And that's where we're not sure what to do with the fact that it could be an unspecified number of months until we could meet again. So trying to figure out, we're still figuring this out, to be honest. And that's why we wanted to bring this question to you all as well, about what would feel right and what would feel comfortable.
Michelle? I'm sorry, Melinda, if you wanted to say anything in response to that.
No, it's okay.
I'm sorry. I completely understand staff limitations, and especially in this crazy environment that we find ourselves in right now. But to me, I think it would make more sense not to completely disband, but perhaps we could set a deadline for, say, like a year from now. If not set a meeting, maybe just an update as to where we are with the disposition study and where we are, whether we would be able to bring this back to the foreground.
Could I just jump in front of Ben for a second and comment on what Michelle said? I think I agree with that because, I don't know, maybe I'm a little jealous of the Winter Hill group that got to kind of conclude with the sense that something is happening. I know it's been a long time and a long haul, and I know that you don't know when it's going to continue, but it would be nice to feel like we had closure here. So even if it's a year from now, getting back.
Okay. What day is that? Ben?
I like the idea of donuts for closure. Rachel, that was a very generous offer. And also being in the space together would be really nice as well. So maybe even if it's not a year out, maybe if it's 6 months out, that would help on that front. I think also if we are going to package up the materials that we produced through this process, I think it might be good to see what that's been. It's been a while since we've, and so if there's a way we could get kind of like where things are now with those, and then even if we could then review them and say, are there any gaps? We've been through this process. We know we've documented lots of things, but are there any gaps that we don't see that we want to make sure are on record for us when we come back, or, our future partners who pick up where we left off?
Yeah, so I mean, similar to, I think the letter to the SRA actually kind of provides a start. We could talk about doing something in more detail that, yeah, just summarizes more of the engagement work that's been done and have that as like a final share out, as Rachel was mentioning. I could, if we plan to meet again at some point in 6 months, et cetera, I can plan to come to whenever that meeting time is with like some more specific form of what that would be. Do people like the idea of like an additional letter or email that goes out, or something that's kind of posted to the Summer Voice page for this project? Is there a particular form that people would imagine this being in? I know Ben mentioned the RFP, but forms beyond that.
Just to remind everybody, the documents that we have produced, so it's just like we'll name them and then we can figure it. There's a pathway here, right? So there's a one-page summary that we all produced out of the engagement out in the neighborhood. That sort of summarize, hey, these are the priorities that we'd like to see. Then there is I think that to me goes along hand in hand with the letter to the SRA is like, so there's like two pillars of like product that carry forward. And then the other thing is that we do have all of the summarized notes from these meetings and these meeting summaries that could like be a package, right? And so there's I could see a pathway here where we say like, these are the two main documents. Maybe there's a third 1 or 2 page, like final summary of additional notes that we want to capture for the future. And then like a backup set of documentation that's like an appendix of meeting notes. So that whoever's picking this up, whether that's all of us here on this call today, or, you know, in our future selves, or, I assume when we're reconstituting somebody will have moved and we'll, need to fill in some gaps. We definitely did have a few folks who had to step away for various personal reasons over time. So that then becomes a body of work that can be carried forward. So I could see us doing that by email and as well doing this like gap filling, like, hey, did we miss something in these 2 documents that definitely needs to be captured in a high level? And I'm definitely happy to be the purveyor of donuts.
Diana?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I don't want to make a lot of extra work for you guys if you're all swamped already. So to the extent that you can use all the good reports and notes that you've already had and just kind of package them all together and say, this is what we did. I mean, I agree. I wish that I agree with Ben Elgart. I wish we had like an RFP level of detail that we could say, hey, we wanted to see, X stories and this amount of square feet and blah, blah, blah. But if we don't have time to do that, then at least we can memorialize all the input we got from the people in the community through all those meetings, and have that ready for whoever picks this up again in the future. And I think if the group can, however it works mechanically for you guys, whether you disband it and reform it, or whether we're kind of on hiatus and then we all have like first dibs at rejoining whenever it starts up again. I mean, either way seems okay with me. So.
Jack, did I see you unmute?
Yeah, I did, but I'm a realtor. I mean, what kind of talks did the city have with the gas station? That seems to be the big stumble here. If they sold it outright, it wouldn't be an issue, right? And you could move forward.
They can only the city could only do that purchase if we were purchasing it for a city function. There has to be like the tool of eminent domain is what allows for a municipality to purchase a piece of property that then is turned right around immediately and out in the world again for another private use. The purpose of a direct city purchase would be, hey, we think this is an important piece of property for a park, from the roadway, for stormwater infrastructure, for a civic purpose. And so that has been this function of this urban renewal question, because one of the key pillars of this group has been advising the SRA on should urban renewal be a tool we use to bring about this joint development. I know the owner of the property, the mobile station property, has been interested in selling. That has, but again, there's this question of the mechanism and the how and the when.
So does the city even have the money to buy it? I mean, the thing on Washington Street, that's a big number. I don't know if they've solved how to pay that off. Never mind do anything else in the city, period.
I will say the sale of that is Ben's and my, that's gonna be our priority over the next couple of years. So this is the sort of the staff capacity challenge is like getting that RFP is one of our top priorities at this point.
Okay. I mean, that's, I honestly, I think it's dead for a long time. I don't like that, but, I just, because of how much they owe down there and how did they let that happen and what kind of lawyer did they have? Or, I don't mean, that's ridiculous. The price that they came up with, and it's not in Assembly Square, it's in a whole different area. Just sad. It's a sad day. That's all I have to say.
Michelle, your hand came up.
Yeah, so just for a point of information, I think that the thought of a potential urban renewal, eminent domain taking by the city has kind of stumbled the mobile station sale. And now that there's something out there saying that, you know what, we're not really interested, it's very possible that he might actually be able to find a buyer. And so just throwing that on the table, because that might be a future issue.
Okay, so just to re-summarize, I want to make sure I understood what we have decided here. In general, so staff will do a summary of the information that has been produced, potentially with some additional description or like way to kind of package it all together. So that might just be, as Rachel was saying, like a shorter document that then has like appendices of the different documents that have already been produced. So the letter, the one pager, some of the meeting minutes potentially of these meetings. See, I have people review them for a reason. And then can also plan some sort of check-in celebratory kind of thing in like 6 to 12 months. I think as people can also plan to give kind of an update at the time if anything has changed. But as Rachel mentioned, there's a very fair chance it may not have. And then in terms of kind of future reconvening, I think it probably makes more sense to essentially disband after that meeting versus a hiatus, just because of the uncertainty around the situation. As Diana mentioned, though, if the engagement of this entire group is not lost on us, and is as future engagement around this site, as we think about the development in the future, when we are at the point of actually doing that redevelopment, the members of this committee are definitely people that we will reach out to as we consider the engagement for that. It's just hard to speak to exactly what process will be at that time. But does that sound accurate to what we have discussed? Sorry.
I think the only thing I'd add that I feel like I heard was for us to also make space in this summary for if there's any final thoughts folks want to voice, that we create a venue within this documentation that's like at the conclusion of all of this, you know, each member wanted to add, like members wanted to add like whatever it might be that we like capture any of those last thoughts into this documentation as well.
Okay. Yeah, I can make it something that is that people can give feedback into. And I guess I also want to make clear, like, we understand that in general, the goal and like probably the recommendation of this group would be to redevelop the parcel, like, and that has come up. And so we can also reflect that recommendation, even if we are not ready to move forward with that redevelopment. We can reflect that recommendation to make sure that whatever final documentation is produced from this group, you feel like actually reflects what your goals were and what was discussed. Okay, so I will plan to get started on that, and I will send out a message in the coming months, kind of with that summary. Great. Thank you all for talking through that. And obviously, Rachel and I wanted to hear, I guess, in general, like we have some uncertainty around the planning of this. So wanted to make sure we don't feel like we're not using people's time productively. That was really kind of what spurred this check-in. So I appreciate the different types of feedback and working through this with us. Feels a little funny to go to neighborhood updates, but I do, given that we're all together, want to at least give a moment. Generally, we leave time if there's anything that anybody wants to mention that is happening in the neighborhood that they want to elevate. I don't know if there's anything, Ben, from the neighborhood council perspective.
Always. So the Gilman Square Neighborhood Council is starting to talk about the property I just read
Sorry.
287 Medford Street. Is that right? Hold on, let me get the exact address. But we are soliciting neighborhood input. Yeah, 297 rather. Medford Street. Ben, you mentioned it earlier, but we'll be reaching out. And in general, you should know that while this has been the most direct way to connect with the city about city-owned properties in Gilman Square, the Gilman Square Neighborhood Council covers other ways to engage around Gilman Square, including more socially. And I want to make sure everyone feels that they are invited to participate in that way. It's not as direct, but it is a way to connect with neighbors around a place that you clearly are not just caring about, but showing up for every time that you participate in anything with CAC. So while this happens to be one of the initiatives that is coming up that we're talking about, there are many ways, whether it's the Gilman Square Arts and Music Festival in September that we host, but obviously you're probably participating in one way or another. But here's an active invitation to use that as a way to stay up to date on things that are happening in the neighborhood.
Thank you.
That was kind of
290.
Yeah.
297 Medford. I'm trying to think of which site this is.
That is the that's the
oh, this is the parcel at Walnut and Medford.
yeah, Walnut.
Okay. Right.
So it's the one that was a garage that kind of imploded. They cleared it. It's going to be, the proposal is to develop it as 100% affordable housing. And it's right on the the path. So a lot of us will be walking by it in one way or another. So it's an interesting opportunity to have more people in the neighborhood and to figure out how we want to best build community with them. So
cool. Is there a particular way that people, if they wanted to provide feedback, or that the neighborhood council is soliciting feedback?
Yeah, we'll be putting together a survey, so that's
Okay.
something to be on the lookout. We have another meeting coming up in February, and you can most easily find us on Facebook. Is probably the easiest way right now. And sorry, we have a new Facebook for now.
You guys say there's a new board that was elected?
There's always changes going on. Yeah, we have a new board member. That's exciting. But yeah, check us out on Facebook, and we also have a email listserv. So there are other ways to connect, but it's probably easiest to find us on Facebook first.
Sounds good. Anything else that other CSC members want to share? Yes.
One other thing on a lighter note, very ironic right now, but on the City of Somerville Instagram page, there's a diagram of the City of Somerville naming all these neighborhoods, but skipping over Gilman Square. Now, I don't want this to be a symbolic representation of the fact that the most pressing initiative for the neighborhood is getting skipped over, but it would be great if from the city that could be rectified, because it hurts. I don't know who to reach out to besides you guys, so
I'm looking.
We'll
I'm
take
looking
care
at
of
the
it.
graphic
I
right now.
appreciate
Yeah.
that, and I know the source, so I know it was taken from other sources on the internet, and we will.
Awesome.
It may take us a little bit to figure out.
It doesn't rectify it. It's where the pin is in the middle, but I understand it doesn't rectify the labeling.
Yeah. Right.
Heard. Yeah. Cool. Any other? And we do still have one member of the public who is present. So I do just want to check in if they want to make comment again.
All set on my end.
Cool. Thank you, James. Hey, Jamie.
I guess more of a last minute question, but I was just wondering, and I hear people ask me too, if as long as nothing is really moving forward, if there will be in the coming, maybe it's the summer or something like that, but in the interim period, any future programming or anything like that in the site, like there was this past summer.
Yeah, so that space continues to be usable, and as you've probably seen, it's become a little bit of like an informal art garden. So there's been some found art that has been brought to that space. The funding that like allowed us to bring programming to the space last year was ARPA funding, so we don't have access to that for this summer. But definitely encouraging if people are interested in hosting programming there. I know we've had some conversations with different groups that would potentially be interested in hosting an event there or events there regularly. So we would love to see people use the space more. We don't have a lot of formal or financial support, unfortunately, for it this year. Yeah, trying to have some conversations internally to see if we're able to kind of do any lower lifts applying for grant funding and working with partners. But there is not currently like a plan for programming on the site this summer the way that there was last summer. But if you hear anybody who is interested in doing so, definitely connect them with staff if they have any questions about like how one would use that space for a public event. I know it can be a little bit daunting to go through that process. Any other questions? Cool. Okay. Well, with that, I can move us towards adjournment. Thank you all again for having these conversations. The next time you'll hear from me will be through email. I'm not going to kind of set up that tentative next meeting yet. But the next time you'll hear will be with kind of the summary information. And then we can also kind of talk about that time for coming back together to either, check in on how things are going, but also just to kind of celebrate the work of the group. Cool. Donuts on Rachel. You all heard it here. Bye, all. Great to see you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, bye.